Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's get started with Week 30's Word Nerd Wednesday. Now, this series, I've been taking a close look at words that come up during my Third Age Thursday readings from Cirion and Eorl in Unfinished Tales. Last week, we rode out to glory as we learned about Felaroth and the Miras. This week, when we get to our Third Age Thursday reading tomorrow, we'll be spending a lot of time at the Halifirien. So today, we'll take a look at the name of that mountain, as well as the names of all the other beacons of Gondor. Well, the ones on the northern side of the White Mountains, we aren't given the names of the ones on the southern side. Now, since Halifirien is the westernmost beacon, and because it's the heart of the story of Cirion and Eorl, we'll end there, and we're going to go through the beacons from Minas Tirith first. The one closest to Minas Tirith was Amon Dîn. It was just east of the Druadan forest, and in a footnote to Cirion and Eorl in Unfinished Tales, Christopher Tolkien says that one of his father's notes explains Amon Dîn was perhaps the oldest beacon, with the original function of a fortified outpost of Minas Tirith, from which its beacon could be seen, to keep watch over the passage into North Ithilien from Dagorlad, and any attempt by enemies to cross the Anduin at or near Caer Andros. The name is Sindarin, and it means silent hill. No relation to the horror survival video game series, of course. Amon, of course, you know as hill from Amon Hen, Amon Sul, as well as its plural, Emin, like Emin Muil. Dîn is the same root that's used in Rath Dînen, the name for the silent street in the hollows of Minas Tirith. The same note I quoted earlier explains that why it was given this name is not recorded, probably because it was a distinctive, rocky and barren hill standing out and isolated from the heavily wooded hills of the Druadan forest, Tawar in Druadan, little visited by men, beasts, or birds. Well, speaking of the Druadan forest, let's move to the second beacon hill, the highest point of the Druadan forest, Eilonach. Now, that same extended footnote in Cirion and Eorl tells us that it is probably an alien name, not Sindarin, Númenórean, or common speech. It could be seen far to the west, and its function in the days of the beacons was to transmit the warning of Amon Dîn. About the only other thing we know about this beacon is that it's needed amplifying by the next one because it was not suitable for a large beacon fire, there being little space on its sharp summit. Now, the next beacon, moving west along the northern side of the White Mountains, the southern side had their own set of beacons, which are unnamed unless you play Lotro, was Nardal. Now, just as Amon Dîn sat to the east of the Druadan forest, Nardal is just to the west. Its role was to amplify the smaller signal of Eilonach, and so the note explains that's why it has the name Nardal, which means fire hilltop. Dol is another word used for hill, like Amon. You know it from places like Dol Guldur and Dol Amroth, as well as Fenúithal and Mindalluin. Now, the word actually means head, but it is used poetically as hill, according to the appendix to the Silmarillion, Elements in Quenya and Sindarin names. Now, that same appendix tells us that Nar means fire in Quenya, as in Narsil and Naria. Its Sindarin form Naur is used in the Samath Naur, the chambers of fire in Mount Doom. Interestingly, the same root is the name of the sun, Anar, and is used in Sindarin as Anor, like in Anorian and Minas Anor. Now, going back to that extremely useful note in Cirion and Eorl, we learn that Nardal was home to the largest of the beacon fires. It was located on the end of a high ridge, originally part of the Druadan forest, but long deprived of trees by masons and quarriers who came up the Stone Wain Valley. Nardal was manned by a guard, who also protected the quarries. It was well stored with fuel, and at need a great blaze could be lit, visible on a clear night even as far as the last beacon, Halifirien, some 120 miles to the westward. Well, much closer than that 120 miles away is the next beacon to the west, Erelas. Now, the index for Unfinished Tales says that while the name sounds Sindarin, it can't be. It was a green hill without trees, so the prefix, which means single, and the element las aren't really applicable. Christopher's conclusion is that it is probably a pre-Númenórean name. Now, the next one to the west, and the fifth of the seven overall, is Min Rimon. Now, I should add here that along with Elenach and Amon Dîn, Min Rimon was one of the oldest beacons. In one of the parts of Cirion and Eorl that I'll get to in tomorrow's readings, we'll learn that for communication with the people of Anorion, the three oldest beacons, Amon Dîn, Elenach, and Min Rimon, were built and maintained. The rest of the beacons weren't built until after the story of Cirion and Eorl, since the point of the system was to warn the Rohirrim that Gondor was in danger, or more rarely, the reverse. Back to its name, the element min is a Sindarin contraction of Mindon, which, according to the etymologies, which you can find in The Lost Road, means isolated hill, especially a hill with a watchtower. Now, that word we see in one place, but it's a beautiful place, and I have to read this from the Silmarillion. Upon the crown of Tuna, the city of the elves was built, the white walls and terraces of Tirion, and the highest of the towers of that city was the Tower of Ingwe, Mindon Eldalieva, whose silver lamp shone far out into the mists of the sea. So Min kept the meaning of Mindon, as Tolkien explains in his unfinished index, that Min Rimon is a peak of the Rimon, which is a group of crags, as Hammond and Skull point out in their Reader's Companion. Next up, the sixth beacon traveling west is Calenhad. The index in Unfinished Tales says the name probably meant green space, with reference to the turf-covered crown of the hill, had being derived with the usual mutation and combinations from sad, meaning place or spot. The Callan, of course, we've talked about before as meaning green, as in Calanarthon, or in its lenited form, Parth Galan. Finally, the westernmost of the beacons and the mountain that we're going to spend quite a bit of time on in the next couple of Third Age Thursdays is atop Halifirien. We'll get to that Rohan name for the mountain in a moment, but it was known in Sindarin as Amon Anwar. Now, Amon, we know, we've talked about that a little bit ago, but Anwar is not something we've seen before, and it's not an element that I could find anywhere else. However, Christopher Tolkien does give us the translation in the Unfinished Tales Index. It's translated Hill of Awe, and partially as Hill of Anwar, also simply Anwar. The name Halifirien means holy mountain in the language of the Rohirrim, and as Christopher points out in the index, this is a modernized spelling for Anglo-Saxon, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right, Halifirien. As for why it's the holy mountain and the Hill of Awe, well, you're going to have to tune into the next couple of Third Age Thursdays for that one. Folks, that is it for today's Word Nerd Wednesday. But come back next time as we wander the wide, wild, wonderful world of words weekly on Wednesdays. And if there's a word you want to know more about, please let me know by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes. Learn how you can support the show, get those ad-free feeds, get a monthly hangout with me, and all sorts of good stuff. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Third Age Thursday as we read about these Beacon Hills, or at least about Halifirien. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill by now. Like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.